Hi, everybody. Welcome to Best Practices for Writing Skill-Based Measurable Goals and Progress Monitoring. I am Alana Harvith, and Matt Johnson started us off today. I see the chat. I know you guys can utilize the chat. I don't think we can talk, but you can talk to us through the chat. So we are going to try to do that today. Next slide. Thank you. So our rules for today, I know it's virtual, so we're going to try to adapt that, but we're going to listen openly, and that's going to be through the chat. We're going to share information, so the chat will be helpful for everybody to talk to each other. Ask questions. Please ask questions if you want to us to answer them. No question is dumb. No, please ask any questions that you may have. If we don't have the answers, we will find it for you. Disagree respectfully. Obviously, your district might do something different than what we say. You, of course, go with what your district says. We're just trying to give you the best information that we have, the newest information for compliance and measurable goals. And we're going to honor your time limit. It's 4 o'clock right now, maybe 4:01, or depending where you are. For me, it's 3 o'clock. So we are going to have 90 minutes with you, and we have a lot of information. So we are going to make sure that we get you out on time. So anything else? If Matt has anything, he can say something, or if anybody thinks of anything, please put it in the chat.
I was going to say real quickly, if you use the chat, make sure there's a choice that says to everyone or to presenters. You want to just make sure you use that. Well, I guess depending on who you want to see your comment, you can change that for yourself. So whichever way you want to go.
And so the first thing we're going to do before we do anything else, you can go to the next slide, Matt, if you don't mind. But I'm going to ask to hear from you guys. I'm going to introduce myself. If you have something in common with me, I want you to put it in the chat. So for example, I went to Indiana University, Bloomington. Yes. If you guys did as well, put that you did too. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about myself. I'm going to introduce myself, and I want to get to know you through that. So we're going to see what we have in common. Okay, so I'm going to go first. Yes, IU. Yes, go IU. I went to IU in Bloomington. For my undergrad, I taught for 17 years, a special education teacher. So if I have any special education teachers, please reach out in that chat. I taught students with autism. I also taught in a co-teaching setting. I have 2 kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old. I live in Hobart, Indiana, which is Northwest Indiana. So I live up in the north. It's 3 o'clock over at my time. Then I got out of the classroom, and I was an IEP facilitator or coordinator. And now I'm getting my superintendent's license. And I go to Indiana State University now. So I'm trying to go to all of the colleges in Indiana besides Purdue. Sorry, Matt. Okay, so I'm going to give you to Matt. So he's going to introduce himself now.
Okay, you're going to love this part then. My name is Matt Johnson, and I've been working for the Resource Center for, gosh, as long as you've been teaching. Oh, that's crazy. This will be I think my 17th year working for the Resource Center, and before that, I was a classroom teacher, elementary and in special education, and I worked a little bit in the high school, and I had and mostly in mild disabilities, but spent some work with behavior. I got my undergraduate degree from Purdue University, so we'll see how things go here later this month. So that's where I started out, and then I worked in Bartholomew County when I started teaching there, and did a little fun thing. I had to learn how to drive a bus with computers on it, and taught kids and all that kind of stuff, that kind of thing. That was, believe it or not, when technology was just kind of coming around the schools there. Excited to be here today. And I don't know, I'm a product of a couple of teachers. Both my parents are teachers. And then we're both 40-year retirees. So I got to live in the schools and make the mimeograph machine run for years there. So remember that sound and smell. So that's a little bit about me. So hopefully you guys can share. We got some little rivalries going on there. So happy to start that off today. So thanks for coming in. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lana to get us started.
Thanks, guys, for sharing. I really appreciate that. We'd like to get to know you, and we can't talk to you right now, but we have some connections. So I just wanted to see how that was going, and I want to engage you as much as possible in a virtual setting. I know that sometimes it's hard, so it's fun to do that kind of thing. And I'm getting to know a lot about you guys with the chat, and I think Matt's watching it too. So thanks, keep it going, keep on adding comments. So this is resources for you and materials. This is a Padlet. It will always be there for you. If you take your phone, you can scan it on the QR code. We don't need it for today, but anything that we say is going to be in there. We have more materials for you in there, resources to take back to your district. So please utilize that Padlet. So it's really good information for you guys. All right. And you can see it later. We don't have to use it today. Thanks. I love that everyone's introducing themselves. Appreciate that. All right. Put the link in the Padlet in the chat. Would you mind doing that, Matt? We can probably do that for you. Yeah. Sounds good. So the next teacher boiler up. My brother went to Purdue, so I can kind of. Thanks. Thanks, Matt. So he put the link in there if you want to put it on your computer while you're watching or listening. That's great also, whatever you would like to do. So next, we're going to get into our learning or our beliefs. So we believe that all students can learn, and we will encourage consistently and constantly them to succeed. So really that is our belief at the center, that you know, all of our students will be able to learn and they will succeed. And we really believe that first. That's our belief. So our learning goals, we're going to talk about progress monitoring and writing skill-based goals as a process. We're going to evaluate and write skill-based goals. We're going to understand the different forms of progress monitoring, and we're going to connect to practice. So we're going to actually practice talking about our goals. Are they measurable? Are they skill-based? Are they compliant? So we're going to have some practice in this. We're going to talk about why, but we really want to hear from you and be a little bit interactive on how you're doing right now writing goals, and to see where you reflect on where you are and where you can improve, because we do believe that everybody has somewhere they can improve on. Okay. We talk about this a lot. It's a shared responsibility. Oftentimes a special education teacher gets the brunt of it, but really it's a village. The student is in the middle. We want to get input from the family. We also want to get input from the student, because they have such a wealth of information. We have, which I'm happy because I see the chat, there are people here that are just not special education teachers, but also related services providers and speech therapists. All of these people together really need to be there for the student. And so it's not just a special education teacher's responsibility, but really everybody's. And we like this infographic just to make sure that we focus on that. We know that. And here's our goal development process. So this is all of the pieces to our goal development. We're going to start always with the present level of academic and functional performance, or the present levels of the PLAF. We start there. That is where the meat of our IEP is. It drives the IEP. We start from the present levels and we go all the way around. Then we go to grade level standards. You have to have those grade level standards, even though the students may be not functioning at grade level, but we have to pick a grade level standard. Then we're going to talk about accommodations and modifications for the student. SDI, specially designed instruction, that's what makes it special. We're going to have the standards aligned to the goals. So making sure that the goals are not the standard, but they align to the standard. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. And of course, progress monitoring the data. So that is kind of our systems, and they all work, they're interconnected, and that's what makes our IEP. That's what drives our IEP. So we're going to use the chat again. Pretend you are a mentor for a teacher coming in. I want you to explain in the chat, what is progress monitoring and why does it matter? What do you think it is and why does it matter? just pretend that you're a mentor to a new teacher and you're trying to explain it. And I just want to see what you guys are thinking around what is progress monitoring and why does it matter in the chat. I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about that or to write it out. Or what is it to you? What is it to your school? And why do you use it? We're not getting graded either. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your responses. Perfect. I'm reading your guys' responses, tracking student progress.
Data, reflection, assessment,
reflection.
tracking. A lot of common themes going through here.
Thank you. I love it. Right, if we're on the right track. Okay, great. So I'm going to first give you the legal definition to wow your friends and your new teachers that you're going to talk to. And then we're going to talk about, yes, you guys are all on the right track and why does it matter? To justify the need for a goal. I like that. So progress monitoring is defined. This is just the legal definition. It's a systematic procedure and you repeated collection and analysis of student performance data, both academic or functional or both. It's monitored over time to evaluate the effectiveness of instruction and intervention. I think that most of you guys hit this right on the head. So legally, this is what it is. It's a systematic procedure to make sure that the students are growing. And if they're not, then you need to change the intervention possibly. But this is the legal definition that but you guys summed it up very well in that chat. So yes, thank you. And we're going to talk about it a little bit deeper. I'm reading your guys' comments, thanks. So the next, sorry, Matt's the page turner. He's the page turner, and I'm is it not working? Oh, sorry. Okay, so progress monitoring is a type of formative assessment. It's planned, it's ongoing, it's used by the students and the teachers during learning, so the teacher can have evidence of student learning to improve the student understanding or learning outcomes and support students to become self-directed learners. So in a nutshell, it's a formative assessment. Yes, and I see somebody in the chat saying it's a challenging time to get to see students and how to progress monitor, but it is ongoing, it's planned. You have to definitely plan. I think that's the word that jumps out of me at progress monitoring, because if you don't plan it, it sometimes doesn't happen, right? The school year goes quickly. And if it's not in your Google Calendar, if you don't have a way to do this, then sometimes you're like, oh no, I have to progress monitor, or that student was absent a lot. And I know those are the challenges, but we really do have to have a plan in place in order to progress monitor and to figure out where students are and where they're going to go. So that is really important. It determines, like you guys said, if the student's making progress. It allows the team to change instruction and meet the needs. Provides present levels and data for development of IEP. So your last progress monitoring needs to be in that present level. So that data needs to happen in that present level to drive the next IEP. So it's really important, that progress monitoring. We need to know where they are in order to figure out if we need to do something differently or try to do something else. It can be considered a denial of faith if it's not completed. So let's say the teacher doesn't do any progress monitoring or not enough. A parent's not happy with the school. They can sue the school, and the school will not win if there's no progress monitoring data in there. Okay, so it's a denial of faith, free appropriate public education if it's not completed. So it's really important to do those progress monitoring things. I know parents don't usually do that, but I'm just, if that were to happen and there was no progress monitoring, the school is going to lose. So that's kind of like the scary part of it, but really it's so that we know where the students are going, right? So progress monitoring is a means to demonstrate education benefit. So that means that we have to have that progress monitoring to know that we delivered our services to those students. So that's one way that we track that progress. And it's just really important to have that in there because it's a denial of faith. It's legal, so it's a legal thing. Benefits of monitoring progress, we can see learning rates, its basis for data-based instructional decisions. So we decide if we're going in the right direction when we look at progress monitoring. We document the progress. It's a clear communication, higher expectations of students. So when I used to, monitor my progress with my students, I had binders for all of my students. My students knew where their goals were and they knew where they were going. I use my Google Calendar. I had it on my Google Calendar for every other week. I would do 3 students each time. And I would ask them to look, here's your goals, here we're supposed to get to. And then they were kind of in it with me so that we can kind of look at that data together. And then I would figure out if it's working, if we're going to progress, or if I needed to figure out something different or change the SDI, the specially designed instruction. But there's tons of benefits, and really that's the biggest thing for me that I saw, that I was able to have my students hold them to high expectations. They knew what their goals were and they knew how they were going to get there. I see some good chat in some comments in the chat.
Yeah, one of the questions that came up too is, what do you do when you have them coming into you? A student that's, you don't see any progress monitoring recorded, and they enter into your school. If there's nothing in the system for that, there's some tricks in the system to kind of get all that data out if you're interested. But the best you can do is move forward and keep track of things. Like Alana said, it's at that point, it's your responsibility to progress monitor. And what I mentioned a lot of times here is, when you have those moving conferences, or even at the beginning of the year, when you're reviewing IEPs from the previous teachers, you see something that doesn't make any sense, or you feel like you can't progress monitor, but the sooner you can fix that, the better. Make the adjustment early. And if there is no data that you can see, start progress monitoring as soon as you can. And that's going to be on your responsibility once you take an ownership of that student, as far as their responsibility or responsibility for that student. So that would be my answer to that kind of piece. You can't do anything about what someone else has done or not done. All you can do is take them where you get them and go forward.
Right. I agree. Thank you for that. The comments in the chat. I really like that, how you guys are interacting. I appreciate that. So common errors in progress monitoring. So the IEP team fails to implement a progress monitoring plan. Like I said, August 15th, you start school, and then you're in October and you're like, wait, I blinked already and it's time for report cards to come out. And there's not enough progress monitoring in there, and that could be a problem. So you really need to use your Google Calendar. You really need to have reminders to try to make sure that you get enough progress. You have a plan of who's going to take that data. Responsibilities are not properly delegated. I always had my paraprofessionals help me with my data, with my binders, because after I modeled, after I showed them, after I faded my scaffolds, I taught them how to do it, but they were able to help me. And so I made sure to have that plan in place and who was responsible, and they liked helping as well. Measures are inappropriate. So if you have a goal that's not measurable, and if my paras did not know how to measure that, that's not okay, because you have to have measurable. Anybody that picks up my data binder needs to know exactly what I'm looking for in order to progress monitor. So that could be an error. If it's not clear what to do, then you need to go back and think about how could you make it measurable and define that measure. Monitoring is not frequent enough. I think oftentimes, or sometimes, I've seen it with one data point, and then you don't know how you're going to get a trend line to know if it's working or not. Really, you should have at least 3 dates. Oftentimes I would progress monitor with my students, and I put the date next to it, but I wouldn't put it in the system until right before the report cards, or I would look at it and I would make sure it was going in the right direction, but then I would put it in when I had time, because I didn't always we have a lot of things to do, right? Oh, you don't always have time to just open the system and do that every time that you're doing it. So I would just make sure I had my dates on there, and I would put it in the progress monitoring at one time, but I would have different dates that I took that data. Does anybody do that or any of the same? I did. I put a date in for each monitoring. I did. Matt, I don't know about you. I know some people like average it out, right? Like they take the average.
I mean, the difference too sometimes is well, it's the difference in the collection and reporting part of that too, because you can take in more data than you put in the system, and so that's, you just want to make sure you meet that requirement that you put in the IEP itself. If you say your frequency of collection is twice a month, then you should see there's 2 data points every month in the school year. That doesn't mean that's the only data that you collect. That's just the only pieces that you put in. So you can do averages, or you can just say, I'm going to take the data I collect on the 15th of every month, or the 10th and the 20th, or the second Tuesday. It doesn't matter, as long as it makes sense to you, if you have a plan to collect it. And with the numbers that we have, that's the important thing, like Lana said, that when you have a large caseload, if you don't have an idea of how you're going to collect it and when, and then who's going to do it, you can really struggle with that process.
Yes, I agree. And I see some people are putting that they're collecting it, the dates, 2 out of 3 trials, how is it recorded?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. That's kind of a maintenance thing. I'll mention that. Sure.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about it. That good question. So make sure that you keep that so that we answer that, or Matt will write it down and we'll for sure talk.
Write it down right now. I'll get
perfect.
Sure.
So we kind of talked about, you guys are like amazing and you already are great learners, and they're putting everything in the chat.
You anticipated the questions.
They already anticipated what we were going to ask. How have you monitored your students' progress and goals? How successful do you believe your current progress monitoring tools are? How might you and your team make changes to improve this process? So some of you guys maybe are doing great and you guys think this is pretty easy, and that's fine. That's wonderful. Maybe some of you have an idea from each other in the chat or something that I've said that you could kind of go back and think about how you can progress monitor differently, or maybe utilize your paras or other people that are seeing the student. But if you already have a great monitoring, then that's awesome, because that doesn't always happen. Some people said, oh, I know I could do better at this, or I mean to progress monitor, but we have a million other things that get in the way. So unless I make time in my schedule, it really doesn't happen. And I totally understand that as a special educator. You have so many other things going on that sometimes it's really hard to do that. Google Forms are a blessing. Yes, I agree. I love Google Forms too. So it sounds like you guys have really great ideas. So thanks for sharing those. And it's okay if you don't, or if it's okay if you want to take one of those things and bring it back to your school, because that's what hopefully we find something that you can take back to your school and think about. So these are the 3 main questions to answer at the CASE conference meeting when you're thinking about progress monitoring and goals. How will the progress be measured? How are you going to measure it? When will it be measured? So how often, and who is going to monitor the progress? So is it only the special education teacher, or there's other people on your teams that are going to be able to help with that progress monitoring? Because it is, again, like we said, legal. You have to do it. And it's really best practice for more people to get involved in that team approach. So just thinking about those questions. I'm going to throw it over to after this. Oh yeah, so we kind of already went over this, just making sure you have a plan, schedule, and selecting a tool and analyzing the data to make instructional decisions. Meaning if students are really, really far behind, their gap is not closing, then how do you think about that intervention, or how do you think about that SDI to change it if you really have to do that? And communicate student progress. And some of the people in the chat were saying, and I think that social workers oftentimes do a great job with this, and school psychologists also, making sure their students know their goals, where they're going to go and how they're going to get there. So I really copied off of that and made sure my students knew their goals and how we were going to get there. And they were really involved as much as possible in the goal setting, and they knew what their goals were in their IEPs. I just think and I was in middle school, and that was a really powerful thing for the students to have access. I'm going to let Matt talk about writing measurable goals.
So thanks for that, Alana. A little lead in there. So when we start talking about progress monitoring, and you can see on that previous slide that the steps to do quality progress monitoring starts with writing a measurable goal and having measurable objectives. So that's where we're going to begin this conversation. And as we get into talking about measurable goals, I'm going to go back to that process that I want to show you earlier. And some of you who've done the training, this is something we've been relying on for a while, and just reminding ourselves that goal writing is part of a process that's connected to other pieces of the event. So it's not just a standalone. That's something that I was just looking back yesterday, actually thinking about the first time that I was writing goals and what that looked like, and how appalled I'd probably be at my own practice at this point, but that was also a different experience, where I first started teaching, we were actually under a different version of IDEA then. So it was a little bit different expectation for goal writing. You just had to be measurable, and that's pretty much it. And that there's not much any, or that their goals just had to exist in some cases. So there wasn't a whole lot of quality control in that instance. So we're going to try to get to a good quality, good practice version of that process here. So where we're going to begin is looking at our present levels, and this is something that we've talked about for quite a while, but I just wanted to mention that as we look at goal present levels, there's four main pieces that I like to focus on that are key as we're starting to go forward. So when you think about present levels, this is the starting point for the IEP. It's the present levels. It's like PLAAFP, yeah, present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Yeah, and sorry, it took me a while to get that out. But when we look at that, the naming is just a convention, so we remind ourselves to look at both academic and functional performance here. We're, like I mentioned, this is our starting point. So the information here, if we have previous data, that's going to be reflected here. So it's going to be a starting point for the beginning of our the beginning development of the IEP. It's going to connect to the goals, it's going to connect to the services. It's going to be the beginning of the story that's told throughout the whole IEP. So I want to make sure that it's current and relevant. So it doesn't have to be all brand new information, but it should rely on what's present levels for the student. So if there's things that need to carry over from year to year, that's something you can discuss as you're having a case conference. But it doesn't need to be a historical record of everything that's going on. So that's when I still see it occasionally when we review IEPs, that there's just this immense present levels that most of which is not relevant. So just keep it relevant, keep it current, and hopefully that'll help you determine what's best for the needs of that student. The skill-based piece, just keep in mind that we want to relate the skill the student's working on so that we know where to go to next. So this is the baseline information for this beginning of this IEP. So we want to have those beginning points that starting, that I guess we want to know where to get to out of the gate. We don't want to have to guess where the student's beginning at this point for relating that information. Focusing on the academic and functional skills are important. We don't want to ignore the functional pieces. A lot of districts have a nice template they can follow. I know in the Padlet there's a kind of generic example of one. But the nice thing about those templates is you know what you're going to get. So everyone's consistent. Everyone's going to be the same. You don't have to just remind people, hey, don't forget to. Just make sure you complete that Padlet. Yeah, that's a great question. What do you guys use in your districts? What templates do you have? Do you use for present levels or other aspects there? It just helps us be consistent. Ultimately, it is about, though, access to and progress in that curriculum. So we want to have, while we relate the students at levels of ability, we also want to talk about how that their ability levels, I guess the outcome of their disability, how that affects their access to and progress in the curriculum. So we want to have that conversation at this point, so we're sure, we can talk about, and the reason we talk about it here is that it starts off the conversations later on when we start talking about accommodations and modifications and goals, services, because once we understand how the students' abilities affect their access to and progress, we can talk about how we're going to, in some cases, mitigate those disabilities or those deficits, and then build on those and hopefully start closing gaps toward their peers as far as that performance goes in the classroom functioning. So once we go kind of establish where the students are in terms of present levels, one way that we often, this is a step in our little process here, is looking at grade level standards. And one of the reasons that we do this is to reinforce the connection to the curriculum, so that as we're developing and we're working on this, developing specially designed instruction, working on skills for the student, we don't want to lose sight that they are general education students first. Every student that we work with begins with that reality, and then we add services and supports to get them as close to that as possible. So in some cases that means they have to be in self-contained environments for a short time, or a resource, or push-in supports or pull-out supports, and those kind of things all can happen. But we do need to think about how the work we're doing is aligned with what's going on in the classroom. And that's one reason I use this little illustration in the background, is just to kind of help us visualize what we're thinking about in education, because there's stair steps that most people can use. There's a ramp that everyone can use, and it's also a good analogy for when special education can insert it when it's available. Because one of the issues we run into sometimes is we talk about different multi-tiered systems of support or different tiered systems, and sometimes we tend to think of special education or specially designed instruction as something separate, and in fact it's embedded within. All those different pieces are, so the students can be in different tiers and receiving specially designed instruction at the same time. So it can complicate things, but it is, but that's what special ed, sometimes what happens in special ed, it's not about what's easy for us, it's what's best for that student. So this is just to illustrate the connection between special ed and specially designed instruction and our general classrooms. And I have to click the button to advance, or it's making me do the work here instead of just pushing some space bars. So we do have a question. If you guys want to share, if anyone has outlines for their present levels, you're more than welcome to share those. There is a base, there's one from Indiana Secondary Transition Resource Center that's in there. It's very basic, but obviously you guys probably have your own specialized versions that are a little more detailed. And every district's going to have a little different piece. So after we have some conversations around, and the reason these two sections come before this is so we have an understanding of what the barriers to learning that the student experiences and what the expectations are at that grade level. So when we get to accommodations, what we're trying to do here is talk about how can we bridge the gap, or at least close it as much as possible. So we want to think about what does the student need in order to make progress or have access to the curriculum. So we have all kinds of ideas. That's something you can throw in the chat. All kinds of accommodations that we use every day, from a pencil grip to a graphic organizer, or all kinds of different pieces like slant boards, and there's a myriad options that we can have access to just give the student access to the content, so they can move forward with their peers as much as possible. So the idea here on this slide is what we're trying to do with an accommodation is support skills different than what we're addressing. So in this case, the students reading, but the accommodations are their glasses. So using the glasses so they can read. So that's something to keep. We run into this thing. We had a conversation about this with calculators, I think, in our staff this week, where they encountered some resistance to folks using calculators for support from students. And this could raise the issue with our audience too, but in a lot of cases, that's a good accommodation to discuss. It's not something I'm not going to try to mandate by any means, but if computation is a barrier for students, like the use of a calculator with proper training could reduce or remove that barrier so they can access more advanced concepts. So if that computation is the barrier to them moving on to more advanced math, then let's talk about ways to remove that. And the argument when I was a kid, I remember teachers telling me not to use using a calculator because you're almost never going to have one with you. And I don't know. I always ask people when the last time I've seen kids walking around without their phones. Every one of those has a calculator. So I don't know. That's a little. So yeah, maybe we need to shout it from the mountaintop sometimes, but there's other pieces too. There's a lot of pieces we can talk about with accommodations, but that's just one big idea. Now, if we take a step further, though, we're looking into modifications, because modifications can change the results we're looking for. And with an accommodation, we're actually expecting the same from the student, same outcome. Right? You're going to be responsible for the same standard, the same piece, and that's a really good point that Alana's put in the chat. There is, accommodations. You need to think about when you're thinking about accommodations and modifications. You consider what you're assessing. Think about what you're testing. If we just want the student to write for length, then let's not worry about grammar. But if we want to work, but if we're not worried, if we're not worried about spelling, but there's different ways to look at those pieces. So consider what you're trying to assess before we talk about accommodations and whether something's an accommodation or a modification. Because a calculator for a multiplication test could be definitely a modification. But if we're looking at word problems, if we're looking at more advanced math, then a calculator is not going to get in the way there. I don't know. So there's always going to be those scenarios that we can talk through. But modification, when we talk about modifications, they do change the expectation of the student. So usually it has to do, we're moving the needle or the expectation for that student. And sometimes it could be they're getting the same or very close to the same instruction in the classroom, but they're being asked to do something different with it. So instead of writing a summary, they're writing a sentence. So those are the kinds of things that can happen in that situation. So we're doing something different. And the expectations at the end are that they're not responsible to the same outcome as their peers if we're modifying that, whether it's a modifying assignment or modifying the whole curriculum, the expectations for that event are different. So that's one of the questions that I always come up with when we have students that are, for the most part, don't receive modified work, but what happens if we run into an assignment that requires it? What happens for that situation? That, not to say I can answer that question, because it's a discussion for you to have at the district level. What happens if we have to modify one assignment for a student? What's that look like, and what's it feel like for them? Well, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at with those things. I would say for graduation, if the student's going to get a 440 diploma, the modified curriculum is probably going to inhibit that. It's going to really get in their way. But if I'm going to modify that assignment slightly, that's the question I would have. Is that really modifying one assignment? Is that really enough to impinge their ability or to halt their ability to get that core 40 diploma? I know what I think, but this isn't about what Matt thinks about stuff. I just think, that's just one of those considerations as you're going through those pieces. There's going to be times you have those discussions, and that's going to be something for the local district and school to really figure out. Nothing like an answer where it depends on the situation, right? So, yeah, I don't know if we're going to have too many people attend that session, Sherry, but we'll give it a shot. So the specially designed instruction, this is the official definition from our federal, and our state in Article 7 says it pretty much the same way. But the core pieces that I want us to get to, and we do by the way, we're getting set to do a whole day training around specially designed instruction. So that's something that's coming. So if you're interested in this and you want to hear more or talk more about it with us, that would be a great opportunity to do that. But for today, when we talk about specially designed instruction, it's all about adapting content or delivery to address unique needs of students that result from the disability and ensure access to the general curriculum. So the key points are it's adapting content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. So that's the piece we don't want to overlook. To address the unique needs that result from the disability, ensure access to general education. So that's a big concept. I think we're going to dive into the different pieces here. So when we dive into the content angle of this is what the students are learning. So what pieces, what do we need to put in front of the students? We're going to expect them to master the same standards because they're going to be expected, for the most part, to be accountable to those standards for state assessments or local assessments. So, but they can learn them different ways. That's the big thing that I think when we read from Marilyn Friend's book, I think that's one of the big points she tries to make for us is that we can teach things in different ways. We can try different approaches to get to the same ending. And we can move the content around if it's not meaningful or useful for that individual student. So that's flexibility at school and classroom levels, see how we can get the student to the same spot using a different means when possible. And that's, again, that's that partnership that Alana showed you with our little triple Venn diagram, with the student, the community, the school, and all coming together to get a good outcome for that individual. So we have to think about, in that school, it kind of lumps everybody together, but as a gen ed teacher, special ed teacher, therapist, support person, paraprofessional, we have to come together to see what the best we can do is best for this kiddo. And that's what this content piece is about. What's the best way to deliver this information to them? Then our methodology is, well, you didn't see what I just did. My screen went weird, but nothing to worry about. So methodology is how kids are being taught. So which techniques, which interventions, which strategies. I've seen a lot of times where special educators are termed as interventionists. So that's one way that I always felt like was my strength, was not necessarily always the content of the classroom, the content of the material, but the way things could be taught, the different methods, the different means, the different dynamics. That's something I can bring in to each class. So that's something I think that we're going to find, and like everything else, once you find methodologies that work with students with disabilities, you're going to find a lot of times they work with everybody. If it's evidence-based for that group, chances are it's something that's functional for more than just that one individual group as well. So that's part of the SDI. So the content, the methodology, and then the delivery. So this is the where and when, the group size, the dosage, what we call it sometimes, where you expect this to happen. So that's just something to think about as you're going. If it doesn't make sense for it to happen in the general education setting, then where it would be. So it's all about the context of it. Because sometimes when we talk about annual goals, this kind of comes in. Where we talk about when do you expect this to take place. So that's part of this. And where do you expect this to be delivered, or the student to perform this particular skill or set of skills. So those are the three parts of specially designed instruction. So the content, methodology, and delivery. So hopefully that gives you the framework of that. Just before we leave you off on this piece, I'm going to turn it back to Alana here in a short second. And the thing to keep in mind with this whole piece is it's connected to what we're doing. So this is the big idea here is that in the first place, without specially designed instruction, there is no special education. So think about that as that's a core piece of the definition of special education is that there's specially designed instruction. So take your time and lean on the people around you for the information. So, for us to really deliver this, we have to have a solid partnership with what's going and understanding with what's going on in general education, solid partnership with our general educators and staff, and a solid understanding of what, if not the content, the methodology, delivery, and those pieces so that we can be a part of that too. So we all know what's going on in each other's spaces and we can hopefully better serve students. That's kind of a big ask right there, I think, to have that level of understanding, but I think that's what will be the benefit. The benefit will be the outcomes for the student once we get all on the same page. So with that, it's hard for me to stop talking, but I'm going to go ahead and try. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Alana, and she's going to get into the details on writing measurable goals.
Yes, so we are going to be practicing writing measurable goals and objectives. So this is kind of our meat of today. We can go to the next slide. Or Matt can. He's like the screen guy. All right. So in order to write measurable goals and objectives, you have to have a target skill. So in Indiana, it's skill-based and measurable. It's not a federal thing. That's an Indiana thing. You have to have a measurable and skill-based. You have to have a stimulus, material, or conditions. If you add a target skill plus a stimulus, material, or conditions, and we're going to talk about what that looks like, and then we're going to add criteria for acceptable performance, or how do we know that they mastered it? That's going to equal our measurable goal. So this is a really nice slide that all of these components make up a goal that will be compliant and great in your IEPs. So next. So how will the student demonstrate learning? So given the specially designed instruction, how will the student demonstrate what he or she knows, understands, or can do by the end of the IEP? So we have a year to get them there. And so we are going to decide what skill that they need to master by that end of the IEP. So those are the kind of questions that we're thinking about when we're making and writing IEPs goals. So here we're going to use the chat again. I need to hear you guys. So these are some words that I think I've used in my IEP writing. I'm not going to lie to you. I probably have said demonstrate, extend, increase, identify, learn, recognize, understand, and show. Can you guys use the chat and put some words that are more measurable in there, that instead of demonstrate, maybe you can put something in the chat, how would you demonstrate? Or instead of extend, you can think of a different word that may be better. Or instead of increase, think of something that's more measurable that you can see, or see somebody else do. Count, thank you, great, that's measurable, I know what it is, right, perfect, select, okay, like point or present, okay, code, okay, thanks, I love your guys' correctly solved, okay. Square at least, okay. Label, okay. Yep, so words that you can see, that you can measure, that somebody else can, you can, okay. So comprehend. So how? So I'm gonna give you some of the answers, or Matt will, because he's gonna go to the next slide. And thinking about, instead of using these, use words that are precise, words that the behavior can be clearly observed. So write, you know what that looks like. Draw, name, point, touch, print, circle, walk. So instead of identify, we usually so identify is on the left, but we usually say, how do they identify it? Are they going to identify it by, we usually just want to say what verb that they're doing. So instead of identify, are they going to write it? Are they going to orally state it? Are they going to, what are they going to do? If somebody else is progress monitoring your goal, how would we know if they identified it? So I guess that's where we're trying to get to, a little bit more precise goals. If somebody else, oh, good, Matt. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, just the idea is like Lon said, is to be really precise and think about when you say, if there's any other interpretation for what you're saying, you're leaving it open for someone else to get it a little off. So if it's to comprehend, how is that student going to show you they comprehend that content? Are they going to write answers to these questions, or speak answers, or say the main idea, or underline the main idea? Or so if you want something, because if it's going on internally to that student, then it's not something we can accurately measure. We have to be able to, like the goals I used to see, like the students will participate in class 80% of the time. That I have an idea what participate means. You have an idea what participate means. Let's define what that means so we can be all clear. And answer correctly could be, yeah, that could be absolutely just fine. The student will answer the problems correctly. They will compute the value of, just so it's clear what your expectation is here, and not just for you, but so you can tell a student that too. That I want you to write this, I want you to draw this, and think about that. Think about the specially designed instruction we just mentioned. What does that look like for this in this case? If you want to write, if you re-say, if you name three attributes of a shape at least, or name whatever it is. So that if you have them speak it, they say in clear terms. You want them to write it, circle it, whatever it happens to be. Point to,
Sort.
Yeah, and by no means is this a complete
No.
list, but I just taking a step back when you look for your goal and say, is there more ways could someone misinterpret what I wrote as a skill? So let's nail it down to what am I going to do when I do my progress monitoring, when I do my assessment? What exactly is the student doing? If they're jumping, walking, circling, pointing, that's probably what should be as it's written in the script. So I didn't mean to jump
No,
in
you're
too
fine.
harshly.
No, you're great. Nope, I agree. I just think, like I said, I thought I did really well at writing goals, and I was like, oh, I'm awesome at this. And then I was like, oh, wait, maybe I could do better. So I just think no matter where you are, no matter how long you've been doing this, sometimes it's nice to hear information and think about it in a different way. And if somebody else would take my binder, they know exactly how to measure that goal. So I learned as I went, and I did better as I knew better. But you just, you do what you know. So that's just what we're thinking here. We're just trying to reflect on our own practices, and everybody, no one's perfect. I'm far from. So next, thanks. So where and under what conditions is a student expected to perform the behavior or skill? So we're going to talk about the stimulus materials or condition that's part of the goal. There's some examples on the next page, and we're gonna go over that with you. So for example, some of these can be used, when are they expected, the goal is given a 3rd grade level reading passage or with the use of the calculator. You guys can read these obviously, but there are some prompts or some things that says, when is this happening? When is this goal going to be progress monitored? When are we doing this? So given a persuasive or narrative writing prompt, just whatever the circumstances are, the conditions or the materials, is part of a good, clear, measurable goal. Has anybody used some of these? Is everybody, I see somebody in the chat. See, oh, okay, got it. All right, so that's just some examples of what a stimulus material condition can be. There's a lot more, but these are just a couple examples, and you have this in the Padlet again. So, and then the criteria for acceptable performance would be how, and I think somebody asked that question, 2 out of 3 trials. What does that mean? So how will we know when the goal is achieved? So how do you know when a student achieves the goal? And if they do achieve the goal, then do you have to do should you do a new goal? Like that's another part of it. Because if they have achieved it before that year up, then you should. But how will we know when the goal is achieved? So we have to have that defined also and measurable. So that's a criteria. So you can do this in terms of accuracy. I always hear 80%. That's kind of like the magical percent. Quantity, how many, frequency, how often, how long is duration. So, okay. And then fluency is the rate, like how many, rate per minute you want a student to perform, maybe if they're working on fluency, a reading passage. So you exactly know what it looks like when they reach that acceptable performance criteria. So let's see.
We have a quick question in there from Carrie about having to add. Well, the reason we go through this process is to remind ourselves that it is a process to write goals, and that if your district requires that things look a certain way, then it has to look a certain way. And the process is sometimes, we have formulas, A plus B plus C in the goals, like the name, the action, the measure, all the time, not everything fits that way. So when it's really up to your district on that piece. If they insist that you don't use percentages, the difficulty in that situation is that you have to know the number of something. So if you say it's 8 out of 10 times, does that mean 8 out of 10 times per reporting period per year? If you don't define it, it's probably per the whole IEP. But if you might say, 8 out of 10 opportunities every reporting period. So that would mean that you have to do this action at least 10 times to see the student. So that you really have to think that through. And that's why we're talking about this in this framework is in goals. The first thing you have to think about when you develop a goal is, how do I progress monitor that? So using 2 out of 3 times, there's nothing wrong with that. And it just has to be, you know, how you address the goal. Now, sometimes if you're going to show an example, you're going to have a percentage and another criterion for that, like 8 out of 10 opportunities or observations, something like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that example here shortly.
And I would also say sometimes when you have to have a baseline. So it shouldn't be arbitrary numbers. So this really, you know, if you just didn't throw out something, if you really know what the student is at right now, if it's truly at 0, getting them to 66%, is that high expectations for that? Might be high expectations for the student. But I think she said 3 out of 4, her district wants her to do 75, 3 out of 4 times. So really every student should be different. It shouldn't be every student has 2 out of 3, or everybody should have 3 out of 4. It should be really what the baseline is. But again, whatever your district says, then you can, okay. So she has like specifics from her district, but I always try to say like, what are where's my baseline, and where do I think they should be able to go. And that's how I think about it. And we're gonna look at some goals, and you guys are gonna tell me if they're measurable or not, and we're gonna see how we fix those. So these are some guiding questions. We're going to do goal review questions in the chat, and we're going to talk these out. And we're going to talk, and you guys are going to say if you think the goal is measurable. What is the measurement, if so? And if you thought the goal was skill-based. So it has to be measurable in Indiana. It has to be skill-based. And if the goal is skill-based, what is the skill that we are trying to teach? And then we're going to do suggestions to improve the goal and other information in the chat. So skill-based equals, so we can look at that. We can walk through this and to talk about if you're teaching a skill, you have to teach a skill for a student. So let's give some examples, and I'll explain it. There's a lot here. Which one should we do, Matt? Should we do the math? It doesn't matter to me.
We can do.
We can do one of these, yeah.
Do one of these.
Yeah, sure.
We have the 80%, and we have fun stuff in there. Sorry.
No, go. Yeah.
One straightened out too.
All right. Oh yeah, I know. Okay, so we're gonna go over the first one together. When given a literary text, the student will demonstrate his ability to use context to determine the meaning of unknown words on 7 out of 10 opportunities with 80% accuracy. So, group, you guys are the group. Is this measurable? Can you measure this? And if so, what are you measuring? What do you guys think? No, measured but needs better wording, okay? No, okay. So what's that word? What's the verb in there that we need to change? What are the unknown words at his grade level? Okay. All right. Demonstrate, yes, great, perfect. So if I was trying to progress monitor this, they'll demonstrate his ability to use context to determine the meaning of unknown words. So how would I have evidence? How would I collect evidence on that goal? Right, how is he demonstrating? Right, so next question, the guiding question is it skill-based? Are we teaching a skill? Yes or no? No. And if we are, what skill are we teaching? I got 1 no so far, I think. Context clues. Context clues, okay. Yeah, so context, do you have to have those? There's a lot going on in the chat. There's a lot. Can you read it all? All right.
I can read through. I mean, it's when you go through this piece of this, and I think you're getting it down to it, you know.
Right.
How do we plan to demonstrate this piece? You know, or what do we want the student to do? You know, when they're reading it, maybe it's when the student is reading aloud, so that can be the given. that when the student is reading a grade level text aloud, they're going to use context clues, and it could be dependent then on. I don't want to get to this answering the how do you fix it kind of question, but but you want to think about what you want the student to do. What's this look like when you're doing the assessment? Also because this one I think sometimes is what a standard can feel like. The student's going to demonstrate ability to use context clues, which is fine, but there's how do you measure that? What's the demonstration part of this, and what's that look like? And so that's the big pieces.
I agree. I think the chat was pretty much saying the same thing. So that's
you guys are firing them off. I appreciate that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
and,
what does opportunity need to be specific? Okay.
And I think when you talk about measurability, there's some things with that in terms of the given, if that's vague and not clear, that can be a problem. If the criterion are off, like you say here, the opportunity 7 of 10 what's opportunities mean exactly? So that would be, we'd have to make that a little clearer for us. So those are pieces that would make it not measurable, because I can't do that. And when a lot of us going through, I try not to interrupt anyone you go through it, because I want to, but when you go through this piece, you want to think about those givens because you're framing up the goal. Because if you make your scope of the goal too big, it's hard. You can't progress monitor every minute of a student's day. So think about what's the problem and where's the problem area, and try to focus on that piece to get in this classroom, in this setting, with this type of thing going on. Here's what we're going to try to. Here's where the problem exists for the student, or here's where the barrier exists for the student, and the goal is how we attack that. So for this student, they're not unknown. Being able to use context to determine unknown words is difficult for them. So
yes.
You could say assessments, you could say observations, or you could say, something so it's clear what you're doing, or just and I think sometimes we have to be careful in the language, because just keeping in mind that parents are going to be reading this, and we want it to be meaningful to them after they leave. We have to be clear in the moment at that meeting. Because if you spend time explaining it to parents or anyone at the table, really, at the conference, at your case conference, then it loses something when it leaves the room, right? You're not going to go with that to explain the context or the meaning of all those phrases. So we have to be clear enough and confident enough to write those goals that way.
Yep. And how would you clear that up? So there's a lot of good stuff going on in the chat. So there is a skill that we're trying to teach them, and that's how to use context clues. But instead of using demonstrate, and I think a lot of people in the chat said that's too vague, how would you change that? Yeah. So people had a great.
Let's go about this maybe systematically and look at the with the given piece. Like, I guess we can look at when given a literary text.
Yeah, this first part.
Anything we would do to improve or change that part when given a literary text? Anything we want to address? And I think that's a good point. Michelle points out, if it's grade level or different, that'd be a very important thing to say here. Because one thing I wanted to impart with you, when you're, at least in the past, when goals are reviewed for end of year 13 or such like things, exactly, nonfiction, fiction. They just look at the goal itself. They're not looking at present levels. They're not looking at the objectives. They're not looking at anything else. They're just looking at the goal statement, that whether it's measurable and skill-based. So that's a big point. So yeah, when given a grade level passage, or when given a grade level fiction text, or whatever it happens to be, so that'd be a nice way to clarify. Here's exactly what I want it to be that the student's reading.
And these are some examples that for compliant goals that were pulled that they weren't compliant. So this is why we're trying to help you guys with
right.
Like, these are some actual goals from IEPs that are used, because sometimes when you're writing all these goals, you think that they make sense to you, right? Sometimes they make sense to your own brain, but they don't always make sense to progress monitor. So
right.
We're just trying to clean these all up and just explain that.
Do keep in mind that you want to address an actual student name here. So that's something I've seen occasionally people mess up when they copy and paste from one IEP to the other. You want to make sure Jane's IEP doesn't say Jim in the middle of it. I've seen that a few times. So that's a big piece. So the student will So what do we want the student to do in this circumstance? We want them to, because something needs to happen when they see an encounter, and given a literary text and an unknown word, the student will, what do we want them to do in that instance? Sometimes we sit in there, you not sitting there, but when you read this, you can, when they encounter an unknown word, what do you want them to do then? Do you want them to highlight the context that might help them define that? Do you want them to sound out the word? If you're looking for context and you're looking for some content of the text, that's going to give you a clue to what that word means. So what do you want them to do in that circumstance? So that's the big question when we get into context clues. Because I don't know what words, unless I do some pre-work with the student, what words in this text are going to be unknown to them. That may be something you can have. I don't know. There's lots of different ways you can approach this, and I get into too long a discussion on this about every time I do it. But it could be just initially having the student underline unknown words. After the student underlines unknown words, what do you want them to do? Something along those lines too. I don't know. So.
And then the second one, we can practice really quick since we're really good now, since you guys were doing the chat really well. When given a problem, student will demonstrate that he is able to solve linear equations and equalities with one variable on 7 out of 10 opportunities with 80% accuracy. First of all, so in the chat, how would you fix that unless you think it's perfect? Is it measurable? And are you teaching a skill? You guys have great things going on in the chat, so we're just trying to keep on going with this. And how would you fix it if you already know the answers to both of those? What do you think that we could do better on that? And then we can go back and reflect to your own IEPs and your own goals to make sure that yours are measurable.
Yeah, skill measurable. No, well, let's back up a little bit too, because I saw one that came through that said, what's the difference between the skill and the standard? And the standard is what is a curriculum basis, right? So that's the target set in your scope and sequence. Here's what we're going to be working toward. The skill, in this case, could be a term we might use as an access skill. So these are skills the student's going to have to attain in order to make progress toward that standard. So keep that in mind. By the end of this IEP, what access skill are we working on toward that standard? So we're potentially trying to close the gap toward that standard. So
and the chat's great. Did anybody did someone say? There are 2 skills, right? Did someone say that? There are 2 skills in this one? Separate yes, somebody did. So you can only have 1 skill at a time in a goal. So let's work on one.
And I always look at this one, if we're correcting these pieces, to look at the underlying structure. What's the problem? Why are they not? Answer the question why. Why are they not completing these problems right now? What's getting in their way? And that's what we need to write a goal around. It could be just following multi-step directions or something along those lines could be the focus. But it's difficult in these kind of things because these are not skills that are going to be all year long. So what are we going to work on the rest of the time? Because they're still going to be struggling in math. Is it because they can't do linear equations or inequalities, or is it because there's an underlying issue that we need to help them with as they move forward? Now, I want to address something real quick too, because it's been rolling through the chat several times. Is this ending piece where it says 7 out of 10 opportunities with 80% accuracy? And I had a question earlier about the trials and pieces like that, where you could do some things that the student will do this particular skill correctly 7 out of 10 times, like we'll answer 7 out of 10 math, single-digit math problems correctly. So there's no percentage necessary there. In some cases, though, you do have to be careful about percentages as you go through, because you want to ask yourself, percentage of what? Correct answers, percentage of, you have to think about that. In this case, this one says 7 to 10 opportunities with 80% accuracy. Does that mean the whole thing is 80% accuracy, or each opportunity? You need to clarify those things so it's relatively clear. So sometimes you don't need the percentage in the goal. You know, if we know the number of problems I'm going to give you 10 problems regularly to see how you're progressing in this. Let's just stick with that. I don't need a percentage. But sometimes I do see the pieces where you say you want a student to do a certain skill at a level, maybe 80% of this accurate, 80% accurate. They want to be accurate in the skill 60% of the time at least, but we want to see it happen in 3 or 4 observations. So that's something you can think about with like a math skill, where I want you to complete this math test at 80% of these problems correct, but I want to see you do it 4 out of 5 in 4 out of 5 assignments or 4 out of 5 assessments. So what that's doing is when you progress monitor it, you're going to see your 80%, and once you see 4 out of look at 5 and 4 out of 5 of them are at that level you're expecting, then that goal has been met, and that's called maintenance. When you look at a goal, and the reason that we even talk about it is for those instances where you have students where they might reach a goal. Let me see if there's some examples here of good goals that I think might express this better.
I think so too, yeah.
Than I'm saying right now. So this one, like this last one, said given 40 environmental or functional words, the student will read 32 words correctly on 5 consecutive weekly probes. So that's keeping every week and keeping record of the reading stuff, whether or not they're reading those words correctly. I probably should say read aloud. And once they get 32 words read correctly 5 weeks in a row, then we're ready to move on to the next thing. This goal is complete. That's a maintenance piece. I could also say, given 40 environmental or functional words, student will read 32 words correctly. That's a fine goal just right there. Read aloud 32 words correctly. The 5 consecutive weeks or in 3 out of 5 consecutive weekly probes, whatever it is, that's just that maintenance piece. So it's not a necessary piece all the time, but just something to have in the back of your mind as you go through that. And I always encourage folks.
I see that with related services, with the maintenance, with the sessions, kind of like making sure that they remember from week to week, things like that. So, and I know there's some related services in here to make sure that they keep their goal up weekly.
Yeah, and behavior would be a good thing. That's perfect. So consecutive.
Yeah.
So in environmental and read would be, I would say, like read aloud, environmental and functional words would be like stop signs, slow, yield, those kind of pieces, exit signs. It's more of a life skills goal, that particular one. So that would be the piece. And you can clarify those things if you want to. You can put in parentheses such as these types of words so the parents understand what you're talking about. Or you could even, that's kind of even a jargon kind of thing, environmental or functional words. You might just say words that they encounter in their daily walks in the classroom, in the school building, or in the community. So that might be clear, but that's really kind of what that is. You walk and don't walk and stop and yield and go and all that, so we know what's going on. So you don't have to write a goal that says student will cross the street 50% of the time correctly. We're not doing that. We're going to focus on the meaning of the words. So, and that's just reading. Now, that doesn't impart knowledge or anything like that. Being able to define it and say it and understand what it means and does is a different set of skills than just being able to read the words outside. Because comprehension is a whole different thing than decoding, obviously. So I've been talking way too much, so we're behind on our time, I think.
Yeah, I know. We only have like 15 minutes. Time flies when you're having fun and goal writing.
Always fun. So I'm going to go ahead and I think this is my turn to jump in.
Yeah.
I think so. So we're going to talk about making data collection decisions real quickly. The big idea here is don't create something that already exists. And that's what I alluded to earlier with this, that we have to understand what's going on in other classrooms than ours so we can take advantage of those things. Like one big example is if we have students that are writing, that writing doesn't always happen in English class. Think about social studies and science. My kids are talking about the presentations and the writings that they're doing in nearly every class period, even physical education right now, which blows my mind a little bit because it was like waltzing and dodgeball when I was a kid, but they're doing a little more, writing around those pieces, which is important. That there's a lot of different ways we can write, and capture those experiences. So take advantage of what already exists if you can. Think about how you want to collect that data once it's identified and where they're going to be, because that's one of those things we talked about with a given, that you box it in enough so that you can actually do it, because that's something you want to consider as you're writing the goal. Where do we expect this to happen? With what? With whom? So hopefully those can give you that target, so you're really looking at one place, because you can't track a student's behavior in every second of every day. But think about where the problems lie. You're not going to write every writing sample. We're not going to review every piece of writing a student does all year. But let's focus it on what we want to look at, and make sure we have all those pieces. What we're doing, how's it going to be done, where is the student, and when are we going to do it, who's going to do these things. So, right. Yeah, if you do, exactly. Because how are you, Jill, with your comment there, if you don't use words like demonstrate, the goal is not measurable, because every one of those things, whether it's right, you can demonstrate things in lots of different ways. So by the end of the year, what's the most advanced skill that you think you want to get to for that student? What's it going to look like? Well, they can, summarize by speaking, verbally articulate a summary of a text they've read, draw a picture of the text, or write the summary of the text, whichever one makes the most sense for that student. But we should have an idea of how we want the student to demonstrate that understanding of that particular skill, or demonstrate that ability. But it should be very clear. Everybody involved, yes or no, this is done. That's the bottom line for measurability. We have to have a yes or no. They be really clear about it. So just a couple things here, keep us on pace and on time if I can. When we make data collection decisions, a plan like Alana, my daughter's name's Elena. I knew I'd do that today. Like Alana said, that works best if we have a plan. The general education teachers and all of our teams, we have a lot of different folks in the room with us today. So it's, all of us can have an impact on this and make it more accessible. And I guess one thing to keep in mind is we shouldn't be duplicating our efforts. If we're working on the same thing as a speech pathologist, it's happening in an English classroom, it doesn't matter who collects it or does the work, as long as we both have the results. So it's important that we don't duplicate those efforts if not necessary. So it doesn't have to be separate from our instructional time, and we just want to select the best tool so we don't have to do extra work. We're not going to make more time in our day. So the best we can do is to focus our efforts so we're not being redundant in them, and selecting the best tools for our the goals we have in mind. So we have questions, but I think I'm going to go ahead and go through some of these since we're getting close here. Some things to consider with collection. Think about where this is going to take place, and this kind of goes back to the given, the condition that we're looking at in the goal. Who's going to collect this? If it's going to be a general education teacher or someone other than the special education staff, make sure, like Alana said, you have scaffolded them. You're going to train them so that they know what to collect. I don't know about how much general education teachers are going to appreciate you adding to what they already do, but you may have a conversation around what they're already doing. I can use that writing sample or that math probe you used for data that I need. So they don't have to create something new either. I just want to know what you're already doing so I can take advantage of that, so it saves us both a little bit of time.
And in our last training, one of the special education teachers said that they just got added to the Google Classroom of the gen ed teacher, so they could see the artifacts. So you don't always have to use a specialized item to collect data. If if your goal is specific, then they probably are doing some of those things in that gen ed classroom, so that's how they collected that data. So I just thought that was a really good idea, especially in Google School.
So think about how often we're going to collect our information, daily, weekly. I don't know, you're going to be a little slightly insane if you choose daily. Monthly is probably something that's possible, but consider what Alana said earlier about the data points too, that we need multiple data points to really predict outcomes for students. If you just have one a quarter, then that's really not going to give us much information to base our decisions on. So we have to think about how often, and then also, I guess, contemplating that with reality also, how often can you do it and keep your, I guess, sanity as you're looking at it, as multiple students are going on, if this is going on with multiple students at the same time. So, you know, what's reasonable for you to complete. That's a big reason to keep track of things when students move in, when IEPs rise up in your buildings. What's in there? What's in the IEP about frequency? Can I actually do that? Is it reasonable to be done that way? If it's not, that's your opportunity to make a change. So when we start talking about progress monitoring tools, things to keep in mind is there's really only a couple true methods to collect data. One of them is single skill or mastery measures. And this is just like a math probe, a writing probe, correct words, decoding tests, those kind of things that we can do over and over that test a single skill. So I'm going to give you a similar set of math problems over multiple times to see how you progress on that with that same set of math problems. So I'm going to ask you to, given the same grade level of a reading text, to underline the main idea and two supporting details or whatever, something along those lines. So I'm going to keep giving you the same assessment multiple times to see how your progress changes over that time. And that's a single skill or mastery measure. We're just looking at one thing. The general outcome measures are something there's going to be multiple things going on within that. So like a lot of times we have those reading prompts where, whenever we measure correct words per minute, we're actually looking at the coding and several aspects of that within that. So that's considered a general outcome measure because there's lots of skills embedded in that. So that's all the difference is. A single skill, we're looking at one thing at a time. General outcome measure, we're looking at there's a lot of things going on within that general outcome measure. So if I'm asking a student to write a paragraph, there's a lot of skills within that paragraph. So focusing on the one thing that you're interested in might be the key to getting that, I guess, digestible as far as the goal goes. For behavioral data, or ultimately looking at student observations. So looking at, is a student doing this as we asked them or as they were taught, yes or no, and we have a record of those pieces. And we're going to talk about some of those things here shortly. Now, as we look forward, there's a lot of slides here that we're going to just kind of gloss through. There's some definitions between what is single skill mastery measures and the general outcome measures there. How to define them specifically, and there's some examples if you want to look at those. This is in your Padlet, by the way. You can get a look at them, see those specific needs there. All kinds of curriculum-based measures, and there's some resources here for you as well. So this is Intervention Essentials, where I pulled those examples from, and then there's many more besides. I don't know if we have time for our little planned activity here, but that's but generally what, as you have the time, these are 3 sites that you want to have a lot of great information for you, and it'd be worth your time to check them out and to share them. Again, I'll try to share the Padlet link again. It should be okay. If it's, hopefully I sent that link. I'll try it again here shortly when we get down to the end. The systemic observations, though, for behavior, these are a little bit different animal. We have to make a plan for how we're going to address this. We have to be consistent and clearly define the behavior. Here's some clear examples of some different methods that can be used as far as different kinds of data of observation recording. Even just counting the number of times something happens or how long it happens, how long it takes for one behavior to occur after something else has happened. So I made a request for students to begin working, and that takes them 2 minutes for them to start working later on. Interval recording is just, I have every 30 seconds, I'm going to check the student for a specific behavior, and we have to be able to say yes or no, they're on task or off task, for example. A scatter plot is another version of interval recording, and I'll show you a visual of that here shortly that'll maybe illustrate what's going on, but it shows you groups of behaviors over time. The ABC charts, these are nice in being able to identify what comes before. We can do that with different pieces as far as intervals, and that's interval recording is one way to do that also. So this is an example of a scatter plot without any visual assistance. When you look at this, you can tell how difficult it is kind of to make sense of what's going on. But if you do the next step, this is adding a little color to this piece. This is looking at appropriate behavior, verbal aggression or physical aggression at recess over specific 30-second intervals of time in the morning of one day for a student. And the blue is a good deal, that they're appropriate. Yellow is something verbal is going on. P is something physical is going on. So the good things you can tell by laying it out and visually representing it this way. You know, sometimes we graph things to make a visual representation. This is a nice way to show appropriate behavior that overwhelmingly the student's appropriate, and there's always the physical is preceded by verbal. So that's an important piece. And the student goes back to verbal after a physical incident as well. So those are some things that visually representing the data can be helpful to. The other pieces, I don't know, I've been keeping track of chat too, and I think you guys have had a lot to say here. There's a lot more. There's many different ways we can collect information, so not just, they all kind of fall in those categories though. We're going to checking on mastery, we're checking on the student's behavior, progress, or it's a general outcome piece. So it's like portfolio assessments are looking at everything all at once. Checklists are nice mastery pieces. Rubrics are nice mastery pieces. Interviews are checking for understanding and mastery. So there's ways, just keeping in mind that writing things down is not the only way to collect information all the time. We can do it verbally, we can do it visually, we can have them write or draw pictures if we need to. So there's lots of ways to collect information and demonstrate understanding. So this is a nice link to some sample forms that a friend up in South Bend did a while back. So this is something that if you're looking for forms to collect data, nice pieces, something you can probably upload and make into a Google Sheet if you wanted to do that, or if you're conversant with Google Forms, you can do that too.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. Well, this is a
know.
full day training typically. So we try to get the highlights. So if you really wanted to dive into more, goals, and we have a lot of, there are whole day trainings that if you can get out of your district that we can talk about. But
So,
that's what we try to condense into 90
and we're
minutes.
just talking about analyzing the visual data there a little bit, little of those pieces, and being able to communicate your ending. So that's, and before we go too far, I want to go back to, I think I opened the Padlet. There's
The Padlet,
there.
yeah.
I
So they
wanna
can
make
get
sure.
information. All of the Padlets are on our webpage. So if you need any different kinds of Padlets, there's different ones as well, not just goal writing, but there's different, and there's workshops and all of those things, and everything is free to attend. So he's going to put the Padlet hopefully
I'll
back
put
into.
this link. It's a different link than what I shared earlier, but this will work.
And if somebody could just tell us if it worked or not, that would be fabulous.
I'll try and
Sorry about that. But you could also email either one of us, and thanks. Thank you, Joyce. If you have any questions, I know there's probably a lot. You can think about processing, thinking about looking in our Padlet and seeing if you want to practice or look at effective goal writing or anything else that you may need. We can help you with that. And
Yeah,
oh, and
I
the
think
email
you
too.
can. Let me juggle a couple things.
I just appreciate you guys like talking to us. I know it's hard with the webinar, and I really do. I'm grateful for your guys'
There's
comments
the evaluation link for
and your
everybody.
knowledge. They're a great audience.